Hey everyone, this time we read Doom by Dan Pinchbeck. So this book is the last in the series, and it's probably the best one out of all of them. Now, Dan wrote this before Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal came out, so he's not going to be talking about those. I just wanted to point that out in case you get this book and you wonder why it doesn't cover the entire series. Regardless of that, you can tell Dan really cares about the series and definitely cares a lot about Doom. He spends a lot of time talking about it, and it seems like he really did enjoy playing this game. He uses some weird slang which I don't quite understand. I feel like it's just his way of referring to some of the monsters in it. Everybody had their own way of referring to them, like the demons got called a whole bunch of different things before we found out that they were actually called demons. I do want to mention one more thing. Because you can kind of tell how Dan feels about the game, it makes the book a lot better. That's not something I really picked up on in Tempest or in Silent Hill. I kind of got that in Mist and Riven, but here it definitely stands out where it feels like Dan is much more passionate about this game than some of the other writers were about the games they were talking about. This is still an academic book though, so just keep that in mind if you want to read this. It's not going to read one of the boss fight books ones or even Masters of Doom by David Kushner. It's still going to feel a little bit like a textbook. So we start off with something that I really didn't even know that I wanted, and that is a history of the first-person shooter genre. Kind of knew that it went back as far as it did, but some of the things that Dan talks about I didn't know existed, which is always kind of fun when you pick up a book like this. From there it moves into kind of a history of its other games, like Catacombs 3D, Hover Tank 3D, and Wolfenstein 3D. I'm sort of glad they dropped the 3D because reading something like Doom 3D on a cover would be a little weird to me, so I'm kind of glad they dropped those from the game. I like how Dan shows that the id team was constantly pushing the boundaries of technology. They constantly seem to want to improve their engine over time, and it really did show how they would add in textured walls and everything like that. They added in the more open skies and everything. They constantly were building out this engine which would eventually, be the basis for a lot of other first-person shooters. And it would also help them as they were working towards Quake, where it would be a fully 3D game instead of just like a 2.5 sprite game. I do want to say, this is a good book, however, I like the way that Masters of Doom tells it more than this. Mostly because that one is written as more of a narrative, while this one is, again, more of an academic book. That being said, we get more background on Tom Hall and the design document that he put together, which is referred to as the Doom Bible. And you can see how just what they wanted to do and how much of that got into the game. Even with Tom Hall kind of leaving the project and it entirely because he wasn't happy with the direction the company was going, you can still see how his Bible, the Doom Bible, still impacted the game, and how much the game still follows what Tom Hall had laid out. So the bulk of the book covers the 3 episodes of Doom, and goes over really the design of the different levels and everything. It's interesting, but not as interesting as it probably could be. It borders on being a little bit boring at times because of what Dan does in this. He adds in a lot of the stats for the different monsters and the weapons that you would find along the way. I really didn't like this, and it's not something that I honestly needed in this book, as it's just kind of great, I now know the shotgun's damage range, I know what the damage range and the hit points for the different monsters are. Awesome. I didn't really need that in here, and I think that he could have used that space to kind of go more in depth on certain things, or talk more about the people that were designing the game, instead of going into things that honestly were not that interesting and just not really needed in the book, at least in my opinion. That being said, in those chapters, you do get some pretty cool insights where you get Dan kind of analyzing the different level designs between Sandy Petersen and John Romero. It's really cool to read about that stuff, and I wish that had been more of a focus instead of some of the other things we got. As you can kind of see through what Dan says, that John preferred, more of the quick action and arcade style of just, flying through the level as fast as you can, killing as many enemies as you can. That constant, stimulus, constant action that you kind of find with Doom, and it's one of those things that I really liked, especially about the first episode. Whereas you see in Sandy Petersen's levels, he's doing more of, the horror stuff, where you're kind of surprised and shocked, and you might need to retreat in order to, get more ammo or do other things. He's not focusing on it being an arcade experience, he's focusing on it more being like a cinematic horror experience, or something along those lines. In getting back to the level design, you also see how certain levels were kind of optimized for multiplayer. And that shows between the two different people designing the levels, whereas Romero was, not really focused on multiplayer. He had more of that in mind than Petersen did. Petersen would design one level that was pretty good for multiplayer, but you can see with what Romero was designing, he seemed to at least think about that more or care about it more than what Petersen did. So as the book wraps up, Dan kind of talks about Doom's legacy a little bit, and he talks about how Doom was influential in the first-person shooter genre, and kind of how it made it more popular and more mainstream. I agree with him here, but I don't think, Doom had the same staying power as other games. All throughout the 90s, you would hear things like, this is a Doom clone, and that's largely because a lot of them they would use the Doom engine in order to make their game. But once you got past, the 2000s, you didn't hear that anymore. You didn't even hear that with, Quake as much as I remember. You don't hear people saying this is a Quake clone or something like that. It's kind of, the best way I can put it in this way, first-person shooters aren't referred to as Doom-like games. You can take the roguelike genre. That game, Rogue, spawned the genre. Doom didn't spawn the first-person shooter genre. It made it more popular, but it didn't actually, take over the genre where people constantly see a first-person shooter and think, oh, this is a Doom-like game. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everybody.